Hey guys, in this video I had the absolute pleasure of interviewing some people from Autocon, a company that's set up to help autistic people find work as consultants, and I spoke to some of the consultants themselves. This is a really good episode. Buckle up. I hope you enjoy. Awesome. So I'm joined with some lovely guests right now. And so without further ado, Chris, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit? Tell us, what your diagnosis is and stuff like that?
Certainly. Hello, my name is Chris Lever, and I am a senior IT consultant with a company called Auticon, who you're going to hear more about.
Awesome.
I am 50, and I got my diagnosis when I was 48. I've spent 96% of my life being different, but without having the vocabulary to describe it.
That's fascinating. Well, you don't look a day over 20, so that's all good, Chris. I mean, like you're rocking it. Don't worry
Thank
about it,
you.
dude. No, but that's really interesting, fascinating. So thank you for that. And also Helen here, Helen Giles. Helen, would you like to just give us a little brief about you as
Yeah.
well?
Hi. So I'm Helen Giles. I am a data science consultant at Autocon. I've been there for just over a year now. And I got diagnosed technically at university, my first year of undergrad,
Mhm.
but basically my mum knew that I was different, for a good chunk of my childhood, and was constantly told, "Oh, so don't worry, Mrs. Giles, she's totally fine." That turned out not to be true. Um, so yeah.
Excellent. Well, I'm really, really pleased to be joined with you guys today, and excited to talk about Autocon and everything in between. And we're also joined by the lovely Steve here from Autocon. Steve, do you want to give us a little bit of a who you are, just so people watching can get a little bit of background on yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So I'm the commercial director here at Auticon. So I tend to work a lot with our clients, and you and I have indulged in a couple of our own podcasts in the past. So it's nice to be on yours. So thank you very
Yeah,
much.
absolutely, Steve. Not a problem. And if anybody is interested in listening to the Autocon podcast that I did with Steve and the team, I will actually leave a link for that in the description box and in the show notes of this podcast. So you guys can just kind of like click through and check out some other bits and pieces. We did some really good content. So yeah, definitely check that out. All right. So for people who are completely like clueless to what we're talking about, Autocon is a a company that kind of recruits autistic individuals to be consultants in certain industries, and that's a kind of you guys have a niche, right, which is more like IT consulting ish, right? So this is kind of what we're talking about at Autocon. And Chris and Helen actually are both consultants for Autocon, which is pretty awesome. So I'm going to start with Chris, if that's okay, and just ask you a little bit, Chris, about how was the working world for you before before you joined Autocon, and I was looking through your LinkedIn actually, and it was like 25 years of user testing software, sorry, of testing software, right, which is just an incredible amount of time. And so you must have a vast working experience. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what it was like for you?
I find the working world confusing. It is like the game of life, except somebody didn't give me the rule book. Everybody else seems to have got it. So not only do I have to do the job that I'm hired for, I have to do the job of fitting into the office that I'm working in. And I find that incredibly tiring. And I didn't know why. I lived in Edinburgh and worked in Edinburgh and lived in Glasgow and worked in, and I, at the end of each day, I would get on the train and I would fall asleep. I was just exhausted from working.
Mm.
And it's been like that. And it doesn't matter the role. I've had big, expensive, fancy sounding jobs. I've had jobs where my job was to screw flat pack furniture together. And I can suffer from burnout in any of them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And and that is probably the biggest difference that I've had since my diagnosis and since joining Autocon. You know, as you say, I've been working for 25 years in software testing. It can be a
Yeah.
very pressurized world. And but what that doesn't tell you is there are big gaps in my CV from time where I just couldn't work anymore. I was
Mm-hmm.
spent. I was done. And I never knew why. And I saw an article in one of the papers up here, and it was about Autocon, this company who hires autistic people. And being autistic, though not knowing it, I started to research it. And everything I read about autism suddenly clicked. It's not just me, there are others like me. And so I started to get a diagnosis. I started on the pathway to get a diagnosis.
Yes.
And I applied to Autocon. That was 3 years ago. And I've been happily working with Autocon ever since.
Wow.
And the biggest difference for me is in that last three and a quarter years, I've only had 1 day sick.
That's good. That's good to know. And you've been through coronavirus and all sorts. We've gone through the pandemic, so it's a really good CV to only have one sick day.
Yeah.
But it's a fascinating story because there are so many individuals, and I come across this all the time. I was in the European Parliament in the beginning of 2020, briefing them on employment and autism, because there's a huge gap. There's a massive deficit between the amount of autistic people who are employed and the amount who are unemployed, and it's no fault of their own, And so it's a really big hot topic of discussion. And Helen, same question really applies to you. How did you find navigating through the working world and versus now working for Autocon? What was the kind of experience you have, if that's okay?
Yeah, so I mean, the primary difference between me and Chris is that before Autocon, I was in academic research. I was working my PhD and I did a short postdoc. So it was a very different environment where ordinarily you're dealing with people who are nerdy. I mean, and that's, so that meant that in some ways it was easy to interact because everyone's a bit nerdy, which, some people think autism, you're a bit nerdy as well.
Mm-hmm.
But it was the same. It was that, exhaustion every day, where I came home and I just crashed. And then weekends, I didn't do anything because I just had to do that, sort of calm down, ready for Monday kind of thing. And when people went out to the pub, midweek, it was always like, okay, me sort of totting up in my head, can I afford to do that and maybe come in an hour late in the morning and sort of, counteract all that? So it's very similar. It's like I could do the job, that wasn't a problem, but it was exhausting doing the job. And, knowing that I was autistic helped because it meant that I knew for myself what the problem was. But I actually didn't tell anyone because I just didn't know how. I've had enough people where I've told them and they've had that sort of, wide eye sort of deer look, and like, I don't know what to do with this information. It's just like, relax. You don't need to do anything. You just need to know. So yeah, I sort of didn't really tell anyone. And then right near the end of my PhD, I had basically what was a pretty big meltdown. And like finally, sort of my supervisor, he sort of looked at me, he's like, I did some like Googling on you, and like on Twitter and like the description, I did have like hashtag Aspie or something. And he was like, are you autistic? And it's like, yeah, actually. And he was like, oh, one of my children is. And it was like that instant, we had not quite been gelling at all. And then as soon as we had that conversation, it was like, we get each other now. And it's kind of like, well, maybe if I'd said something earlier, it would have helped. But who knows? You never know how anyone's going to react.
Exactly. And so how did you find Autocon? Like, how did you come across Autocon?
So it was COVID. I previously before that, I'd been abroad working. So I came home just as COVID hit down. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was struggling to get jobs. And then I was just sort of Googling just like, consultancy, IT. And then I think I also included autism because I was like, what if there's someone out there who helps autistic people find jobs?
Mm-hmm.
Like a sort of headhunter, but with autistic people. Yeah. And the sort of Autocon just sort of appeared out of some mirage of Google. And I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. And I was like, all the way through the application, I was like, this is too good to be true. Like, it's not going to be this good. It's going to be a cult or something. And like, as I went through, it was like, okay, they're still kind of normal. Okay, that's good. We're going through a process. Nope, still nothing strange. I'm still waiting for that shoe to drop.
Yeah, the weird.
You guys can't be this good.
Candles or some
like,
weird ritual or something.
I come in one day and like the guys at Auticon are just like, come join us, Helen, and there's some creepy dark room. But maybe that happened. You've been there a while.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure there's some catch. No, I'm only joking. Definitely not. So how would you find? And this is a question for both Chris, you and Helen, how do you find Autocon as a go-between? Because obviously Autocon are acting almost like an agency between an employer and the employee, right? So how do you find them as a almost sub-employer, and like, how are they easy to approach? Like how would you describe Autocon, from an employee's point of view? Chris, do you
I
want to
think, yeah, sure. I think I get two really big advantages working with Auticon. And one of them is how I interact with companies. Before I go in and work in any of the companies, I work for about 5 different companies through Auticon. Before I go, my job coach will go in and will speak to the team that I will be joining. And they explain A, about autism in general, and then B, about how it presents in me, myself. So they've done a lot of the legwork for me. I don't have to explain so many things over and over again. And it's incredibly comforting to know that conversation has already been had.
That's super powerful, because it kind of like it allows you to kind of relax a little bit more, so you don't have to have that awkward kind of like AA meeting style. Good afternoon, my name is Chris, and I'm on the autism spectrum. Any questions? Like, it is a bit like that, yeah. And it can be quite daunting. Helen, do you want to chime in? What's your experience like with Autocon as a sub employer?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically the same. It's that they go in and they sort of spill the secret first, so I don't have to worry about that. I can come in. They know, like, maybe they've not met me, but as soon, like, they have some knowledge, and then after that first sort of bit of an awkward week, like it always is,
yeah,
everyone's actually pretty chill because they know what's going to go on. But also it's that sort of what's good of Autocon is if something weird happens and I'm just not clear on precisely what happened, I can talk to my job coach and be like, okay, so someone said this and then someone else said this. I'm confused. Could you sort of neurotypical language translate for me just quickly? I know what's going on. It's kind of like sort of you don't need to come out at work because someone helped push you out the closet before you even got there.
Yeah, exactly.
And it makes everything so much simpler. Like if they have those questions where they're worried about upsetting us by accident by saying something weird, they can talk about that with a job coach in that sort of training session before we've even got there. They can ask all those silly questions, which are never silly. There's no such thing as a silly question.
No.
And then also, like, I've been at a couple of trainings myself, where at the very end there've been questions and they're like, can I ask Helen a question? It's like, yeah, sure, go ahead, because that's it's kind of why I'm here. It's like I'd rather you ask, why are you blue and purple, than you just sort of spend 6 months wondering why you're blue and purple.
Exactly.
It's just easier.
Transparency, right? It just makes everything a lot more easier. It sounds like the job coach is like a really integral part to what happens between the relationship of the employee and employer, which is very interesting. And pioneering this type of idea, there was a term that I used when I was briefing the European Parliament. We were talking about champions, autism champions within a working environment. And so one of the indicators I'd put down was that we should nominate somebody within a company or an employment establishment to say, okay, this person's the autism champion, and they do a similar role to what you were saying. And it's so important, and I'm fascinated by it. Now, I have one more question for Chris and Helen before I move on to Steve. And this is, I suppose, not controversial, but it's I need to ask this question. Is it anything that you would like to see change the way Autocon helps you and moves you through the process? Or do you think like pretty much everything is kind of really satisfactory?
I think that they have a lot of things right. They are very receptive and they are constantly looking for ways to improve. And all of the changes before they are adopted are run past the consultants within the organization.
Good to know.
We have our input.
Yeah, and see, this is the thing. The reason I asked that question is because everything is a learning process, right? And when you're doing something so ambiguous and kind of quite, groundbreaking, really, as Autocon, is you're setting kind of like a precedent and kind of being in front of that, and so people can have judgmental ideas and stuff about companies who will help autistic people. But I think it's really important to know that those companies do pivot and do listen, do learn, they communicate with you guys. And I wanted to hear that from you rather than me putting that in your mouth. And I think it was important that you said that. Steve, we're gonna open the floor to you, if that's okay.
Perfect.
How is it dealing with these two lovely individuals? What's it like for Autocon and dealing with autistic individuals? Do you find it different to dealing with kind of your typical based employment type of agency, or do you find it I want to know how it is for you.
So, to be honest, Dan, the whole ethos, and I must clarify now, we're not a cult, but Helen makes me laugh on a regular basis on lots of things, and we sometimes are on client calls together. So I know Helen's sense of humour, but no, seriously, I think it's a whole combination of things. Working with all of our consultants and Helen and Chris and. It's humbling because my role is really to work with our clients. My background is technology, so myself and our head of consulting, we tend to work with our clients to understand the technical nature of the projects. But more than that, it's around understanding the team, the pace of the project, the environment, the expectations, the unwritten rules of the office, such that we can get a really good understanding not only of the type of technical skills required, but also the kind of cognitive skills and the type of person and the type of work. And I guess, if you were to put that into the general context, who wouldn't want that? And what we tend to do is to say to our clients, we are in the fear and risk mitigation business, just going back to your point about job coaching. Because it's what we're trying to do is, as a social enterprise, shift perceptions and change attitudes. So what we're not, we're not a recruitment agency that pushes neurodiverse individuals into roles completely unsupported. This is about a typical IT consulting model, such that the likes of Helen and Chris work for Autocon first and foremost, but knowing that there is a whole support structure there, and we have done as a good a job as we possibly can to mitigate the risk and to educate through awareness the immediate team of people that our consultants will be working with. So back to your original question, extremely fulfilling, extremely humbling, and it's great to be working with our clients from a technical side as well. So just awesome, frankly.
I'll tell you what I can see, Steve. I can see two very happy individuals here who are employees, and that is really, really reassuring to see. And this is so inspiring for the entire autism community, because it's like, you don't often interview autistic people who are in a full-time employment or even part-time employment that are as happy as these two lovely people we got on the show, because people don't understand specific needs and additional needs or specific kind of requirements, and I think that's so important. Autocon is bridging this gap quite aggressively in a good way, not aggressively in a bad way, and I think that's excellent. So the most important question, Steve, for you is, if people want to join in on this lovely happy cult, I'm joking, it's not a cult. If we want to join and be as happy as these two lovely people, how do people get in contact with Autocon? How do you apply? How do you get in touch? You want to give me the rundown?
Yeah, so I mean, we're always recruiting, basically, Dan. I mean, we're very fortunate in terms of the type of projects and the type of clients that we work with. So the easiest way is through our website, auticon.co.uk. There is a specific careers site there, and job openings are always posted, so you can literally apply online, any time of day or night. Feel free to kind of contact me directly, steve.hill@auticon.co.uk. And one of the things that we're also trying to do is to create a dialogue with parents as well, because we understand that there is a big chasm potentially when education stops and the workplace starts.
Yep.
So what we're doing, and we can't do everything all of the time, but we're really conscious to try and spread the word of what we're doing, such that we can try and add some reassurance to parents and remove some of that anxiety that we are here, and we can hopefully create long-term career opportunities for as many autistic adults as we possibly can.
Absolutely, dude. It's amazing. You actually, you're changing lives really, and that's super important. That's important to me. With working in this community and being an advocate, it's like, how do you change someone's life? How do you improve their condition? And I think like this for me is typically like one of the only companies I've spoken to that literally does this on a scale that you guys do, which is super awesome. And Steve, I'd actually love to get you on my podcast just to talk about Autocon in general, how it started, all the history and stuff. I think that would be super interesting for my viewers as well. So if you guys are interested in that video, drop me a comment. Or you can DM me or at me on Instagram and Twitter and let me know if you want to see that kind of episode. But I'm sure Alyssa will reach out to Steve and we'll book that in. Okay, so everything that Steve just said, all the links are going to be in the description of this video and in the show notes on this podcast and in the blog that will be on my website too. So if you want to apply, reach out and speak to Autocon, just really get a general feel for what they do, definitely check them out. Don't take my word for it. Chris and Helen here right now, they're smiling because they're part of this awesome family of Auticon people. I wasn't going to say cult, so it's all good. I love it. Guys, thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Wonderful. Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having us.
Okay, take care, guys. Bye-bye.